Hello, my name is David Turner and this is another Lunar Poetry Short. Today I am still in Istanbul but fantastically in Asia. I can't get my head around it, but I'm joined by writer Ender Baskan. Hello Ender.
Hey.
Hey. We're going to start with a reading from Ender as by way of introduction.
By the road there was a watermelon store. By watermelon store, I mean you could only buy watermelons, hundreds of them piled up waiting. Some were round, some were long, some were dark green, others were light green, some were seedless, others were seeded. I pictured deliveries arriving each morning like a truck full of soil or sand. Melons would pour out the back door from a tray elevated hydraulically. The man who now sat on a chair dozing off must have stacked the whole lot before knocking down a few himself. He looked like he had one in his belly. The neighbourhood was quiet, no one was bothering me, so I stood before the melons and wondered if I could fulfill a wild urge to leap onto them, throw myself amongst them, caress them. There was something ripe, sensual, holy about these melons, as if they held the qualities that breasts, shoulders, asses, and all of human flesh could. I don't know how long I stood there for, but finally I chose one, none in particular really, picking it up gently, holding it in my arms, almost stroking it. "Karpuz!" the man yelled out. "Karpuz, evet, yes," I said, and paid for it, wondering what I'd do with it. I wandered off track with the melon in my arms and into the suburbs. The streets were empty, but for neatly tied plastic bags full of rubbish. I threw my gaze up. The apartments here were typical of 70s or 80s architecture, probably 80s, the windows relatively small but still white panelled and rectangular, though after more thought maybe they were built in the 90s. Culture and technology, as far as I knew of the Turkey back then, took a few years to travel from the West. In Turkey, the 60s was 70s, 70s was 80s or maybe 90s and probably so on. Though I now can't tell if this idea still holds, the 80s and 90s in Turkey were completely foreign to me. The fraying cord had been cut. Many of these apartment blocks had mosaic facades with geometric tile patterns. Even the security bars over the windows on lower levels had a gentleness about them, ornate and seductive rather than intimidatory, politely reminding would-be intruders not to attempt forcible entry. There was a playfulness here that was completely absent in new joyless developments around town, around the world. I wanted to seek out the architects, line them up, shake their hands. Over time though, as far as I could tell, the windows in newly built apartments had gotten smaller and smaller, and for that I should line them up, developers, builders, whoever else, and give them a bullet. Contemporary architects escaping with a stern word. Why smaller windows? Why? Something about cooling, heating costs, perhaps glass costs, vague allusions to sustainability. But those with money in courtyards have rooftop decks and floor-to-ceiling glass. People have forgotten how to use blankets. If I had power like Ataturk had had power, I could decree a blanket law. Blankets for everyone, big windows. The sun is a giant life-giving ball of flame. Let it charge through the walls and onto our faces. Now it was as if these new apartments were designed to make you forget the outside, that nature was inferior to what we could create indoors.
Thanks, man. Cheers.
Okay.
So, Ender, hello.
Hi.
And what the fuck are you doing in Istanbul?
I am... They sent me here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They did. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been telling people I'm doing my military service.
Cool.
Yeah, so no one bothers me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've been at MauMau, the residency program. I suppose reintroduce that because people may not have heard the short podcast I did about MauMau. So that's an artists in residency program, which includes a writers program also. And you were part of that, weren't you? You're not at the moment as we speak, but
yeah.
How was that?
It was great.
Yeah.
It was unreal. I kind of just landed in Istanbul and went straight to MauMau and had 3 weeks there with some really interesting, lovely writers and artists, and then I escaped.
Yeah. And now you're just permanently on the run.
Yeah, now I'm on the
we were
run.
in the secret location.
Yeah,
bolted doors and windows, and yeah. And you are from
Australia.
And whereabouts?
Melbourne.
Yeah. Just a bit of context there. And that's obviously a lie anyway, because you're on the run, so you wouldn't give away your true
yes.
identity. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you, after or during and after the 3 weeks at MauMau, did you work towards any specific outcomes for that program, or was it just a
not really? No. I was just here writing a novel, completing a novel, so I just used those 3 weeks as a chance to ground myself here and meet a whole bunch of nice people and try to become part of some community.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. How did that? Were you seeking to become part of a community, or did it just happen?
Well, I think I was definitely open to it and seeking it, because I'm going to be here for perhaps up to a year, maybe more. I'm not sure when I'll leave, so I guess you want to meet people with similar ideas and are interested in similar things.
Yeah, it seems. I mean, MauMau, I was talking before about how it seems like a hub, and it's a great place to, if you want to come here for creative projects, whether they're whether you're just working on your own or collaborative, it seems like a great place to start and meet people.
It is. Yeah, I feel like I've been dropped right into the middle of it, and everyone, not just at MauMau, but everyone else in that community, that creative or artistic community, has been very open and welcoming. So it's lovely. Yeah,
I mean, I went to one exhibition opening, and I got like 12 new Facebook friends. It's amazing, but unfortunately today, because all social media has been shut down in Turkey, I can't make sure they're still my friends. So I don't know. They may have dropped me. But,
maybe they're all government spies.
They might be. It's a good job. I can't log on to Facebook because they definitely get us today. Maybe we'll go for a second reading and move on to talking about the main body of work that you're working on while you're here.
Okay. It was a quiet street, and I just stood there facing its blue and white tiles. A man thrust his head from a second-floor window and called out, "Hey, what are you doing here?" It came as a jolt. I kind of reared back. Just appreciate the building, that's all." "What are you doing with that watermelon?" I could see right up his nostrils. They were flared wide because his face was all scrunched up. "Oh yeah, the watermelon. I'm probably going to eat it, actually." "The whole thing?" "I'll probably share it. You want some?" "No, I don't want any. What are you doing here anyway?" "Can't I just look around, appreciate your building?" "Are you a student or something?" "Yeah, I am, actually." "What do you study? Architecture?" No." "Well, what do you study then, huh?" I thought for a second. "Seismology." "Seismology? What's that?" "Rumbling in the earth. Earthquakes." "Earthquakes, huh? You don't say." His eyebrows raised a little. "Yeah, and I think you're in good shape if something happens," I said. "Really?" "Yeah, I think so. Do you know that there's a 62% chance of a devastating earthquake over the next 30 years in Istanbul? Touch wood, it'll never happen, but it's just what I'm saying." I disarmed him, and now he was pondering something as he leaned back into his apartment as if to survey its structural integrity. "So what's this about the building that interests you?" he said. "Well, I could go on for hours, actually." "Hours? Really? Tell me something." "Well, if there was one thing I'd like to point out, perhaps it's the tiles on the facade." "The tiles? You're kidding, right?" "Yeah, I mean, you'd think they were purely decorative, but they're actually able to limit structural trauma. It's kind of like this watermelon. You really need the skin." "Ah, come on. You think I'm an idiot? Get out of here, will you?" "Vegetables, fruits. We're looking for nature in the sciences." He shut his window, vanished back inside.
Cheers, man. So maybe it'd be a good time to talk about the novel that you're here to complete and how that came about, because you told me before that it relates to a previous trip to Istanbul. Tell us a bit about that.
I came to Istanbul 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago now, as a kind of reconciliation with Turkey. My parents are born in Turkey and left as kids, and I'd been here once before with my mum, but I was quite a lot younger and it didn't really sink in. It was all a blur. And so I kind of came here for about 6 weeks alone, and just wanted to kind of do that go back to your roots thing. I found myself kind of parachuted right into the middle of the protests that were here, the Gezi protests, and it was an interesting time. And as a writer, you just want to write about it.
Yeah. Would you be able to tell us a bit about those protests? Because it's amazing how often that topic has come up when I've been talking to artists over here. It seems a huge event for people, but I'm not going to pretend I know enough about it to explain it. But if you could just tell us, sort of, I don't know, briefly
In my own
what
words,
happened,
yeah.
briefly what it was about, and
well, it's quite interesting because I think everyone has a different take on it. I have my own, which I kind of explore within my book, but I mean, I think there was a building up of pressure over a long period of time, pressure in a kind of restlessness and discontent with the government and the way of the government over many years, and it kind of all came to a head about this in the park, I guess. And I think ultimately what it meant was that people from all walks of life who perhaps didn't consider themselves ever to be on the same side as another person locked arms and roamed the streets and, you know, voiced their concerns and stood up for one another. And I think to be here during that time, it was something that I'd never experienced and that I never thought I'd experience in Australia anyway. So I asked myself a lot of questions about my own political involvement and my own way of life, and it was really a lot of vitality going on in Istanbul, and the ripples from that are still being felt today.
And the novel, at what stage are you at? Are you sort of working towards a very definite goal with it, or is it still developing?
Well, I've done a lot of writing. I just need to give it some shape, I think. There's a lot of raw material there. It's as if I'm a kind of ceramicist and I've materialized a whole block of clay, and now I need to make it into something. Yeah. So I've got a lot of things that I want to say. It's actually, I mean, in terms of what kind of novel, I think it's part reportage, part memoir, part autobiography, part criticism and essay. It's a kind of vessel. Is it? I'm trying to say, is Istanbul the subject matter, or is Istanbul the backdrop? Both, I think. Yeah. It's hard to. No. It's interesting because I was speaking to yesterday. I recorded a feature podcast with some poets that regularly attend spoken word Istanbul, and we were talking about this idea of feeling initially like Istanbul might be your muse, but suddenly realising it's sort of the other way around. It's not very balanced. You know, it's sort of unfairly balanced in the favour of the city. The city that sort of does what it wants, and you can't purely use it as a backdrop, perhaps, because it's too influential. Over, especially if you're living here. I mean, I've only been here for a few days, and it's oppressive and beautiful and amazing and horrible all at once. And it can't. I deliberately asked the very simple question about it then, because it can't really be answered in that way. But it's. But I suppose you. Maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like you do need to talk about it in simplistic terms when you're talking about themes for novels and such, in order to sell the idea to people, you know. Yeah. And obviously the writing will be much more complex, but to explain the theme to people. But I don't know, it's very difficult to explain Istanbul to people, never mind artwork that's based on it. It's, I think I try over and over to explain Istanbul, and I do explain it over and over to people, and each time it's different, and each time it's wrong, and it's a very restless place, and that's good in many ways. And how has the city influenced the development of the writing? Well, I think Istanbul's a city which now you could no longer stand still in, and this is partly what Gezi was about. It's that they were clearing more and more public space and trying to convert it to private space, and so everything now, you know, you hear people talking about traffic in Istanbul, and it's the bane of everyone's existence, but I think the traffic is good. It slows everyone down. You can't. A city is not just a traffic network in order to get indoors into malls and offices and homes. You need to be able to stand on the street. And much of my book is about the concept of like a literary device, the idea of the flaneur, the person who wanders the city, wanders the streets, without gaping, but kind of gazing on the fringe of the crowd, observing rather than being kind of swept up in the crowd. And a lot of my writing is about this push and pull of specifically about the protests. Of there's a pull for me to get involved and into the protests, but I'm trying to maintain my distance so I can report. And so that's the flickering of reportage and memoir and criticism that I try to kind of bring to life.
It's very difficult to people watch in Istanbul unless you're indoors and looking at them through a window, isn't it? I was sort of thinking about this yesterday. Istanbul reminds me very much of northern Italian cities, but without the piazzas. There was no place to gather, is it? And I've been very shocked there's no parks anywhere. There's some tiny park. They wouldn't be considered parks in Britain, But it's a very good point. Actually, you do feel like perhaps that's what people find oppressive, is that they constantly feel like they have to move.
Yeah, everyone's part of the stream. Yeah, even I think this is particularly disruptive because it's a part of Turkish or Middle Eastern or different idea to what perhaps we experience in Britain or Australia, which is time as a concept is different. And so I've got a strong sense that people feel very disrupted by the changes here. You can't kind of loiter outside like you perhaps once would have here. I think you get shifted indoors to play cards or drink tea or whatever. Under threat of a huge water cannon. It's crazy over here. Well, anyway, we're going to go for a third and final reading. Okay. Thank you. To be honest, the watermelon was beginning to weigh me down. I came across some kids trying to kick a soccer ball through a window. They seemed like twins, must have been only 5 or 6 years old. One was the kicker, very serious about his craft, while the other retrieved the ball and giggled a lot. The kicker had this unbelievable kick on him, holding the ball up high around his head before flinging it down onto his foot, generating an enormous ballistic force. Each time they failed to get it in the window, the ball crashed back to earth, flinging a seismic ripple up their spines. They seemed content to fail. Succeeding would have likely ended the game. Yet the end came before success. The giggler twin threw back his head and held his hands up to the sky as the ball plummeted back from a collision with glass. It was like an eclipse darkening his world. He closed his eyes just before impact, then was felled like a demolition job. "Ali! Ali!" his twin yelled. I rushed over, still carrying my watermelon, to help. Blood streamed from his tiny nose and birds circled his head. "Ali! Ali!" I said to Ali, "Are you all right?" He was conscious but dazed, and we stemmed the blood with an entire packet of tissues. Their grandmother emerged from the building with a bottle of lemon flower cologne, that legendary all-purpose Turkish tonic, and splashed some over his face, patted his forehead, and waved the bottle under his nose and told him to sniff. I carried Ali up the stairs, hesitating at the door, because I couldn't kick my shoes off, and I knew Grandma would be concerned about that. She told me it was okay, and then proceeded to follow me through her place with a mop, more concerned with the clean floor than the wounded child. I laid Ali on the couch. She covered it with a blanket first. He recovered quickly, making known his desire to go out and play again. Must have been the cologne. But Grandma said no more playing. I finally introduced myself and promptly took my shoes off. She took them from my hands. Then I stood there wondering whether to sit. She finally offered. I refused. I had to go. I pleaded. She relented. The apartment so immaculately clean, me in contrast, incredibly dirty. I should have poured cologne all over me. That would have helped. In all the commotion, the ball had been lost, but my watermelon remained on the street. The kicker brother, Erkan his name was, wanted, of course, to keep kicking, but I wouldn't allow him to kick my melon despite his pleas. Abi, karpuz. There was a strong desire in young males here towards kicking and general destruction. Give them Lego and they'll build, I thought. Give them a complete form and they'll deface and obliterate it. Where could I find another ball for them? I thought to ask Grandma if Erkan could come with me to a shop to get another one, but I sensed she'd refused. My watermelon and I climbed back onto the tram. Soon we passed a store with some soccer balls outside. I got off at the next stop, bought a ball and leapt back onto the tram heading towards Grandma's. Now I had a watermelon in one arm and a soccer ball in another, and eyeballs lingering on me. When I got to the front door, I didn't know what number to press to be let in. I couldn't remember whether it was the second or third floor. I guess second, pressed 5, no response. I pressed 6 and had no luck either. The lady didn't have a clue what I was trying to say. Then I came up with a terrible idea that I liked very much at the time. I just kicked the ball up through the window. Brilliant. I went across the street and, like the kids, salivated over the open window. Perfect. I put the melon down, took a breath, saw in my mind's eye the ball sailing through the window, took another breath and kicked it right through into the apartment. Yes! My triumph was fleeting though. There was a crash, a scream, some more noise. A man came yelling to the window. He was not the grandmother. I ran off toward the tram. On the tram there were these 3 Kurdish girls begging. They slunk around the cabin with wild elegance in their green eyes, wearing these incredible colourful silks. I couldn't help but watch them. They were magnetic. But the moment they saw you, you were in for it. So I looked down. Abi, Abi. A fat woman sat beside me with her breasts cascading onto her knees and yelled at the girls, "Go back to your country. You're nothing but dirt. You're all bringing Turkey down, down." An anger rose up within me. I turned towards her. "Leave them alone. Maybe they've got no country." "How do you know?" the woman said. "Neither do I said. "You want me to go home too?" "Yes," she said. "Go back to where you came from. Go away." I felt a strong pang of guilt about the window. In the panic, I'd abandoned my melon.
Thank you. I like it when people read stuff and I'm forced to try not to laugh. It's good. We're going to end with a couple of questions. The first one is, what if you could tell us about any influences of your writing, development as a writer?
I guess I have many. I think it starts very American, it's very US centric, and it starts with a lot of I guess early mid 20th century writers, generally from migrant backgrounds. I didn't really realise that until a lot later, but people like John Fante and Henry Miller and John Dos Passos and then Kerouac through to later Hunter Thompson and the new journalists, and more recently someone like Ben Lerner, generally writing from the first person, and very much grounded in place.
I was going to say the era that you just spoke about, as you've read, it's they were the writers that sort of pictured in my head the first person storytelling of detail, small details about, and it goes back to that idea of, I suppose, of just wandering and trying to capture everything, even if it's a futile experience or attempt to try to capture everything. That idea of wandering around, just trying to see everything, regardless of the speed of life around you. And then the final question is, what would you recommend to our listeners to check out or watch or listen to? This doesn't have to be literature based. It can be.
I would say I've just completed a book called Reality Hunger by David Shields, and it's a manifesto, in a sense, on the novel. And I know that we're always talking about the novel and also about poetry and other literary forms and where they should go and how they can stay relevant or become relevant again. And I think he says a lot of great things. He argues for the boundaries of fiction and non-fiction to collapse, and I think for the poet that's a more familiar concept. But for fiction and the novelist, that's still very much a topic of debate. And go and check that out. I've just also went online and bought a whole bunch of books that he recommends and refers to in that book, and I think that's a good sign. I'm doing as he says.
Yes, yeah. It's definitely important to disregard any free thought and just follow orders. I find, especially in Turkey, you just have to, because there's no point trying to think for yourself.
No,
because you'll just end up water cannon or something.
Not at all. No.
Or on the run as we are.
Yeah. So take everything I say with a grain of salt.
Yeah. Thank you, Ender. We're going to have any blogs or websites or anything, any places where our listeners can check you out. We'll list those in the description of the video, because they often get lost in speech on here because I make a mess of saying them. But thank you, Ender. I've really enjoyed chatting to you. It's been great meeting you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. And you lot.